You're listening to Alamo City Limits Podcast with Noah Magaro-George, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of Pounding the Rock in SB Nation.
What's going on, Spurs fans? Welcome back to Alamo City Limits, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of SB Nation and Pounding the Rock. As always, I'm your host, Noah Magaro-George, and that's my co-host, Damien Bartonek. Man, how are you feeling now that the season is officially over for the Silver and Black?
Man, I don't know, man. I mean, it was a fun year. So, for the listeners, this was my first year covering the Spurs for Pounding the Rock. I definitely, in the offseason, I want to do my best to do as many kind of draft pieces and just pieces in general about the team. But I think for me, what I enjoyed, not only as a member of, Pounding the Rock now and watching the Spurs throughout the years, I just really got a chance to learn so much. Even though the Spurs weren't winning very much, I learned so much as a writer, man. I think, honestly, that's what I took most away from this year, and that's one thing that I'm kind of just feeling reflecting on a little bit, is just this entire experience, bro. That's just kind of where I'm at.
I feel that 100%, and this was my third season with Pounding the Rock, kind of my third season writing about the Spurs, covering the Spurs, my second year having media credentials to do the Zoom meetings and stuff, and I'm not going to lie, I think for me, this year was probably the most emotionally draining. I texted you a bunch of times throughout the season, frustrated or annoyed or whatever. I definitely enjoyed the highs and lows, and I know that they lost a lot of games like you mentioned, but for me, part of it was and I love Spurs fans. I love every Spurs fan. I'm not going to tell fans how to be fans, but there was a lot of really, and I know toxic is kind of a word that people laugh at, but there was a lot of toxic discourse about, this player is this player is that. Oh, the Spurs are going to be this. Oh, the Spurs are going to be that. Oh, they shouldn't tank. Oh, they should tank. Oh, Dejounte is, all NBA or all-star or most improved. There was just so much discourse that honestly probably didn't need to happen. And that was so divisive. And so this whole year, really, it was exhausting. It was fulfilling. I enjoyed it. Definitely enjoyed it. I don't take any of this for granted because I'm not guaranteed this opportunity to do what I do. But just a long year, interesting year. And, man, we'll get right into it. But just so our listeners know, we're recording this podcast April 17th. It's about 9:23 p.m. Central Time. But as we mentioned a few moments ago, the Spurs, their season is done. They lost to the Pelicans 103-113 in the first round of the Western Conference play-in tournament. And I think now is the perfect time for us to review some of our preseason predictions, maybe break down some of what went wrong for this team in 2021-2022. And before we get into those topics, Dame, why don't we start with the question, what did we learn from their postseason contest against their divisional rivals? I'm talking about the play-in game. So I'll let you go first, and then I'll expand upon that, and we'll continue to dive deeper.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't really learn anything from their play-in game, to be quite honest with you, Noah. This is the team that we've kind of seen throughout the entire season, whether it's, a team that fights hard like we saw, right? They were down pretty big in the second and third quarter, ended up coming back, making it close. What was it, 4 or 5 minutes left in the game? I mean, I don't think anyone thought the Spurs were going to come back and win it, but hey, they're a really tough team. They've always been that all year. But they're limited, right? Defensively, they haven't been a great team all year. They only gave up 113 points, which, really, I don't think that's too much in the modern NBA, right? Teams are getting that, honestly, pretty on a regular basis. But I think offensively, man, there was a lot of things that stuck out to me. I think the lack of shot creation immediately just stuck out to me as something that we've already known they had, right? That was already an issue. But I think just further affirmed it for me. I didn't really need this game to know that, but at the same time, if we're going to be taking anything away from it, I'm kind of just taking away what I already knew, right? And I know that can kind of sound arrogant, and I don't, want it to sound that way, because I know some listeners believe, sometimes we can come off that way. But quite frankly, when you're watching this team as much as we do, and you're breaking down the numbers, and you're looking at it, from these angles, we weren't expecting them to win this game regardless, and we weren't expecting them to be world beaters. So for them to come up short, it wasn't anything I was too shocked with. I would love to talk more about kind of some individual players here. Personally, I loved Devin Vassell's outing against New Orleans. 7 of 13 from 3. Just looks so smooth, so fluid. Being that player that I think I've mentioned so many times on the show about being really just versatile and fitting no matter where you go as an organization, as an offense. Devin Vassell fits. He was the guy for me that I was just so impressed with, man. I think before I kick it to you, one kind of a negative thing that I saw was really honestly, whether you call them ticky-tack or whatever you want to say, the Spurs got into foul trouble with their two best players really early. I believe Jakob and Dejounte had 2 fouls each with, what was it, 7 minutes left in the first quarter? Right? It was early.
Yeah, and Dejounte ended up having 3 in the first half. Yeah, he was in foul trouble, for sure.
And maybe, Noah, to some people's credit, maybe that's something that I wouldn't have quote-unquote seen if they weren't playing in a high-stakes game, and maybe there was some undisciplined play there. So, I mean, I'll give you that. But from a broad perspective, kind of tying this all together, I didn't really learn too much. I kind of just affirmed what we already knew. But with that said, it was a really close game. I think it was kind of if you could tell a story in one game of the Spurs year, I think this could kind of tell you a little bit about it. And that's just kind of my thoughts and takeaways, brother.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I understand, like, most fans, they watch the game. Like, they watch the game. They're tuning in as fans, right? You want to see the bright side and everything. You want to be optimistic about everything. You want to tell yourself, so-and-so player, this guy's a future all-star, this guy's future all-NBA, this guy may be an MVP, this guy may end up being, from the 29th pick into being our best player, the guy who's going to lead us into the next era of championships. And I just don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't believe I'm wrong, but I'd like to be held accountable here. As people who not watch this team, we analyze this team, right? We're paid to analyze the team, to be honest, to be unbiased, objective with our coverage. And so I'm not watching these games and rewatching these games and breaking down these games from a perspective of, let's see if I can find any silver lining. I'm just trying to bring you honest coverage as a journalist, as an analyst. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that, I saw something that I didn't. And I think I've told you all year, like, when I see something, I'll tell you. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I'm seeing something that I'm not going to see. And so from that perspective, there were 88 games this season, Dame, and I either wrote a preview, a recap, opinion piece of 86 of the 88 games from the preseason all the way into this play-in game. And so I don't think it's fair for a lot of people to say, oh, well, it's fine. I respect the opinion that, we sometimes we come off as being short or dismissive, but at the same time, I think it's really being trying to be realistic with the team. It's not supposed to hurt anybody's feelings. It's not supposed to discredit any players. But as you mentioned, one game. This is one play-in game. It's not a playoff game. It definitely has a playoff atmosphere. It is a postseason game, but it's not a playoff game. It's against a team that also was more than 10 games under 500. I just don't know that there's any one thing that I can take away and say, yep, that's what we needed to know. No. We had 87 games before that to figure out what this team was, who these players are, what they might be capable of, what this team's outlook looks like for the future, or even for just the end of this season. And so I'm in a total agreement with you here that I don't think we really learned anything. And that's okay. We don't need to come away with some grand take. We don't need a hot take. We don't need this, controversial, bold opinion. We're just trying to give you an honest opinion about what we saw. And I like what you said about Devin, and I think we can expand upon that a little bit because I do want to talk about 3 players in particular from this game. You started out with Devin Vassell, so if there's anything else you want to talk about Devin-wise, you can totally do that, or we can move on to the next player, or I can continue to expand upon Devin.
Yeah, we can move on from Devin, and I guess I'll take over with the player that I think you're going to bring up next, which would be Keldon Johnson, if I'm correct, right? Is that, that you're going to move on? So I'm going to say my piece, and then I'm going to throw it to you really quickly. So for me, Keldon Johnson's first half, I literally texted you this in the middle of the game. I said everything that Keldon was doing these first 25 games of the year, he did in that first half. Legitimately, whether it's tunnel vision on drives to the basket, whether it's just really a reckless, abandoned nature when putting the ball on the floor in general. Defensively, there were some issues there as well. It was literally Keldon Johnson, Noah, from the first 25 games when it comes to his offensive ability. And New Orleans kind of played him really, really well. You know what I mean? They were really forcing him to put the ball on the floor. And I think in general, what you saw was a guy that was starting to press a little bit. And again, back to that point I made earlier, maybe if you're going to say, well, we needed to see him in a pressure situation like this to see what you were getting. Okay, right, okay. But, man, this really kind of just shows that when he's struggling a little bit, there is a little bit of tendency, whether it's in the subconscious as a basketball player, to kind of go back to what he knows, right? And so we're seeing there's still a way to go there, right? He's not all the way there. He's not that $110 million player that some people said he is, right? But at the same time, that second half really showed his growth again, because what happened?
Yeah.
He went right back into the swing of things, right back into what he knows. So you kind of saw the tale of Keldon Johnson throughout the season in that game a little bit for me, especially on the offensive end, because defensively, I don't know about you, Noah. I don't think he's a high-end, like, elite defender. I think he's an okay defender, right? I don't think he's anything, quote-unquote, special. But in that case, offensively is kind of the big thing that stuck out to me with him. And I think the tale of two halves really kind of told a little bit of the story of what Keldon Johnson's years has kind of been like, from my perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And I did want to say one thing before we moved on to any other players or even went further in depth on Keldon, as I saw these people on Twitter. It's not one individual in particular. It's several people who were like, well, if you had that energy for DeMar DeRozan last year, then you better keep the same energy for like Keldon Johnson or Dejounte Murray. And it's like, look, man, I understand they didn't necessarily play well, and neither of them shot particularly well from the floor. Keldon didn't hit a single three, 0 of 6 from three-point range in this game. But again, it's one game. There's a lot of variance in one game. It's hard to read into the performance in one game, but we can't analyze one game. And so I really liked what you brought up in terms of, look, he came out in the first half. He looked like the Keldon of old at the beginning of the season, reckless drives, committing turnovers, offensive fouls, really forcing things at the rim, not really looking for teammates. And then he made an adjustment at halftime. And I think that's all you can really ask of him. Do I think he is the player who finished out the season averaging, 22 points per game, basically over his last 10 or 12 games? No, I don't really think he's quite there. I think it was a mix of competition. I think there were other guys who were out, like Dejounte Murray, Devin Vassell, Lonnie Walker, Jakob Poeltl, who gave him an opportunity to have the ball in his hands more. And I think in the long run, it's going to help his development. But in terms of this one game, again, really love that he was able to bounce back in a sense. So shout out to Keldon for that. He's not quite where we want him to be, but he showed some really nice strides. Now we can move on to, I think, the player who was under the largest microscope of everybody, which obviously, Dame, it's Dejounte Murray. I'll talk a little bit about him and then I'll throw it to you. No, he scored 16 points, 5 of 19 shooting. Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, Jonas Valanciunas, they were a large part of that. He wasn't able to finish over Valanciunas when he got to the rim. He hardly was able to get to the rim because Herb Jones did such a good job locking him up. And then a guy like Jose Alvarado was able to sneak around, make life hard for him on ball, on switches. He was, really pesky as a help defender. And so I think about Dejounte Murray in this game, and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was out 6 games, right? He had an upper respiratory illness. He lost 7-8 pounds. We can make any excuse in the book. Look, Brandon Ingram missed like the last month of the season. He was in and out of the lineup. He had not played for pretty much the same amount of time as Dejounte, and he came in, he played well, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to make it about one game in particular. But I also think about last year's play-in, Dame, and as you mentioned, this team is lacking self-creation, and Dejounte is their best self-creator. But I don't think he's elite in that regard. They're going to have to, and we'll talk about this later on the podcast, but they're going to have to find a way to either put a 1A or 1B by him, who's a more natural scorer. Last year's plan, 10 points, 4 of 17 shooting against the Grizzlies. Similarly, had long defenders, guys who could stay in front of him. We know Dejounte loves to finish with length. He's gotten better at finishing at the rim. But if you guys got guys who are able to really stifle him and stop him from doing what he wants to do, getting to his spots, even when he gets to his spots, forcing him to shoot over length, like that's really tough. And so when I think about Dejounte this year, this is not just a one-game problem. It wasn't like, okay, one bad game against the Pelicans. Look, outside of the 31-point outburst he had this season, the other 4 matchups, including this one, he only shot 34.4% against New Orleans this season. That's 4 games where he just essentially laid an egg. Did he did he distribute the ball to his teammates? Sure. Did he turn it over that much? Not really. Was he still rebounding the ball at a good rate? Yes. But I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to find an upgrade over Dejounte Murray as the guy who is the guy. That's not to say Dejounte Murray is not a fantastic player, Dame. He's an all-star. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, maybe expand upon that a little bit. And again, this is not like a shot at Dejounte. Fantastic success story, 29th overall pick to an all-star. But we've said it multiple times on the podcast. Not all all-stars are created equal.
So for me, I have some thoughts on Dejounte that'll kind of segue into our next topic. I don't know if you kind of want me to touch on my thoughts just right now already, or because I feel like it's kind of a good spot to go, but I don't know how you're feeling. If you're feeling like that, we can do it. If not, we can keep it pushing. It's
whatever you feel comfortable with, man.
Right.
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, so So here's the thing with Dejounte, and I echo what you say, especially when it comes to shot creation and his offensive ability, and how you mentioned how this isn't one game we're taking this from. Rather, this has been an all kind of year thing. It's really the state of his game right now offensively, right? And so right now, when I'm just looking at the raw numbers just in my brain, in my consciousness, when I'm thinking about a player that's going to be the engine of your offense, someone that's going to be at a usage rate of near 30%, DeJounte's at a little bit over 27%, someone that's going to have the ball in their hands a lot, they have to be a dynamic creator, not only for themselves, but for others. They have to have a bread and butter that's either ultra efficient or they just have on-ball gravity. They can do things. They can bend a defense. They can, make things happen, right? Make the proverbial chicken salad out of you-know-what, right? Sometimes it just got to happen. And right now where DeJounte's at, I'm just going to throw out these kind of numbers, and this is not to say he's not a good player. This is just where he's at. So he, from 2-point range, is 3 percentage points below league average. From 3-point range, he's 3 percentage points below league average. From effective field goal percentage, 3 percentage points below league average. True shooting percentage, the same deal, 3 percentage points below league average. Free throw rate, he's at 19.9. The league shooting free throw rate is a little bit under 25. So overall, right now where DeJounte's at, he's not there as that offensive player. And I think in the playoffs, in this game in particular, but just in the playoffs or in just in your team, for your team in general, if you're going to have a guy that has the ball in his hands that much, he has to be dynamic. And it's not to say DeJounte's not going or couldn't potentially get there. But right now, and going forward projecting, I think it'd be unfair, Noah, for me to sit here and tell you to your face over Zoom, DeJounte's going to be that guy. Because that's not fair to him. That's a lot to ask from a player that honestly isn't there right now, right? I mean, we haven't even gotten to the pull-up numbers where, as a pull-up three-point shooter, he shoots 28%, which, granted, he only takes a little bit under 2 attempts per game. But that's not very good. As a pick-and-roll ball handler off of points per possession at a frequency of 46%, which is very high, he ranks in the 59th percentile, right? So right now, I just think in general where he's at, I don't think, Noah, he can be your 1A offensive talent when it comes for this team, right? You said, maybe you need to find a 1A, a more natural scorer. I would agree with that. I think you really just need to find an overall just offensive creator, an offensive initiator, right? The name that keeps popping in my head is just get Trae Young. But obviously there's only one Trae Young, right? But you just need someone with that ability to bend a defense, to actually create and just have a dynamic, versatile offensive game. And I know I talked a lot right now, so I'm going to dish it back to you. But that's just kind of where I stand on his game right now. And kind of just the culmination of his season, kind of where he is as an offensive talent for me, that's kind of, what I'm seeing or what I'm looking at.
And so I think this sort of leads into an interesting statistic I really wanted to share with people. So B-Ball Index, really great resource for people who want to write about basketball, analyze basketball, break down basketball, understand basketball a little bit better. They have a passing creation quality and passing creation volume. And so passing creation volume is exactly what it sounds like. How often do you create for others, right? So on the far end of the spectrum, you have guys like Luka Doncic, Trae Young, you got Chris Paul, you got James Harden, you've got those guys. On the other end of the spectrum, you have guys like Clint Capella, Rudy Gobert, like guys who are not creating for their teammates. And then passing creation quality, I think this one's it's not as self-explanatory. So basically, B-Ball Index takes information from another analytics site called Second Spectrum. And the quality of the shot is based on field goal percentage. It's also based on accuracy of pass. So they measure that. They go play by play, measure the accuracy. Did it hit the shooting pocket? Did a player have to move to go get the ball? Did it hit them in full stride? Et cetera, et cetera. The other thing it takes into account is, okay, now once you get the ball to another player, was that player open? Did you pass them open? Were they already open? Or did you hit them for example, it's a pick and roll. The ball handler hits the center is not open, but they put up a floater or they get a layup past their defender. So they still made the shot. It still counts as an assist. But on the quality spectrum, it would be low because you did not create an advantage for them. You simply got them the ball and they did the rest of the work. So you look at these guys who, let's be honest, there are a lot of guys who are elite. You would consider them elite passing creators. The quality is elite. The volume is elite. the guys who we're talking about in that range. So the quality is from -3 to +3, and the volume is from -1 to 4. You've got a guy on the very top of the quality scale, Trae Young. Right under him, Nikola Jokic. Right under him, Steph Curry, Luka Doncic, Darius Garland, and then you've also got LaMelo Ball. And right under them is LeBron James, okay? You look at the volume, all those guys are about similar volume. Dejounte Murray is a hair under the volume of where Trae Young is, but his quality, where those guys are about 3 to 2.5, Dejounte Murray's passing quality is at 0.5. So that's on the same scale or rank as guys like Monte Morris, Tyrese Maxey, Seth Curry, Andrew Wiggins, Tyus Jones, Corey Joseph, unfortunately even a guy like Rudy Gobert, who, I mean, they're not saying he's a great passer. They're saying he doesn't pass often, and when he does, it's decent. So I just think we look at these things and we take into account that, DeJounte, he 9 assists per game, this, triple-double that. But at the end of the day, you take a look at the tape, and a lot of these assists, we've talked about it before, Dame. 80% of his assists, nearly 80% of them this season, have come to Jakob Poeltl at the rim. And a lot of Jakob Poeltl's shots are those contested floaters. And he makes them at the second highest rate in the league, at the third best percentage in the league. And it's not that DeJounte did not get him the ball and put him in a slightly favorable position, but he didn't really create that much of an advantage. He didn't have to do that much to get this guy open. He didn't really get him open. Most of these have been contested floaters. They're not open. So I think sometimes we look too much into the pure, volume, pure per game numbers, and we're not really that concerned with, again, the numbers that we have talked about, like passing, creation, quality. And for me, that's the biggest detractor for people who say, DeJounte is an elite creator. And I'm not saying he's not good at his job. I'm not saying that he isn't a really fantastic point guard, an all-star. But he's not on that same echelon as guys who pass guys open, who create advantages consistently for their teammates like Trae Young and Nikola Jokic and LaMelo Ball and Luka Doncic and Darius Garland. He's simply just not in that stratosphere, and that's okay. But I think for us to look at this team honestly and see what do they need and where do they need to go, we have to be honest with where DeJounte is. And again, like you mentioned, that doesn't mean he's not going to get there. But as it stands right now, he's got a long way to go. And maybe he gets there, but I think first to have an honest conversation, we got to be honest with where the guy is. And that's not in any way to take away with what has been a fantastic season for DJ.
Yeah, and I think this is honestly a good segue. If you don't have any other thoughts for the play-in, we can segue into the next segment about essentially, I mean, you have some players listed here. Something that came up in my head, I would love to do like a quick rapid fire, just a couple of thoughts really quick. I think it would be really fun to just kind of throw some thoughts out there about these players.
Let's do it.
So me and Noah are basically going to talk about like kind of what we took away from the season, some of the holes that Pop in the front office need to fill, and honestly, who the Spurs should keep around for the second season of the rebuilding process. So obviously, we all know the Spurs need front court depth, versatility at the 3, the 4, a little bit at the 5 as well, maybe even at the backup 5. Their defense was below league average for a good chunk of the year, being nice there. And I think overall this team just needs some juice, right? So I think before we get into the kind of the nitty gritty, I want to throw out some names for you, and I'll start with some rapid fire with the first player, and we'll just go like that if that's cool. You want us to go like that?
Yeah, let's do it, man. I'm excited.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm ready for that. I'm ready to have fun.
Okay, so first is going to be Josh Primo. For me, very raw, needs a lot of time to develop. I love your comp about Jordan Clarkson when it comes to Josh Primo, who could potentially kind of fill a role like that, kind of in year 2, year 3, year 4. But right now, he looks all of 19 years old.
Yeah, no, I think he looks all of 19 years old. We were told in the preseason when he was exceeding expectations that, watch out for this guy. This guy's that dude. He's going to break into the rotation. And sure enough, he did, right? He broke into the rotation, but that was more circumstance than skill. G League season's almost over. You traded a bunch of guys like Derek White away, and you pretty quickly see, their flashes of the defensive versatility, their flashes of off-the-dribble creation, but they're not consistent. Shooting below 30% from 3, not particularly efficient anywhere else from the floor. The turnovers are not great when he has the ball in his hands. So not a guy that I say, okay, Spurs fans, you're not out on this guy yet. Just be cautiously optimistic and be patient. Youngest player in the NBA. So we can move on to the next guy.
So the next one's going to be Josh Richardson, and I'm going to let you start first. But with Josh Richardson, also, you got it. The third part of the question: do you think he should be kind of kept around for the second season of the Spurs rebuilding process?
Yeah, so let's start with that question first. So I think Josh Richardson, everything depends on what you do with Lonnie Walker, because I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to have Josh and Lonnie. They're sort of redundant, not necessarily in their skill set, but in their size, in like the defensive role they would be playing. I don't know that you can play them a whole lot together, but I like what I saw from Josh. And if I had to sum it up in 2 words, I would say pleasant surprise, right? Like he came in, we didn't really think he was going to play that much. Doug McDermott gets hurt, opens up minutes for Josh Richardson, and he sort of runs away with that role. Even with Lonnie hurt, when Lonnie comes back, Josh Richardson still getting those minutes. 3-and-D player, literally the epitome of that for a decent price. He's under contract next year. I say you should keep him unless you can get a good deal, like a first rounder. But if you're keeping Lonnie, then I think you got to move him. It just doesn't make sense to keep both of those guys around.
Yeah, for me, I think Josh Richardson, and just kind of rapid fire here, pleasant surprise is a great way to put it. Veteran presence, another sentence could be everything that you could have hoped for when it comes to Josh Richardson's arrival here in San Antonio. Shooting 44.4% from deep in San Antonio, through 21 games, averaging 11 points, 3 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 1 steal per game. Really, that low usage kind of 3-and-D piece that you need, right? I think Josh Richardson's been excellent, and you guys after this episode can go back to our trade deadline pod, and I essentially envision Josh Richardson in the Lonnie role, right? That's the next player we'll talk about here. Lonnie Walker the fourth. I'll start here. With Lonnie Walker the fourth, for me, I know on that same podcast, Magaro-George said, on a cheap deal, Lonnie makes sense to bring back. For me personally, I'm just kind of cutting ties. So I think as a rapid fire kind of quick sentence, farewell, and I wish the best for you. Because I think personally he just doesn't fit. I think he needs a breath of fresh air. I think probably the Spurs could use a breath of fresh air as well. And I think while he has a lot of potential as an athlete, there's obviously gifts there. He just hasn't been able to put it together, Noah. And so I think right now, rather than, not to say you're wasting a spot with him, but rather than, allocate minutes to him, I'd rather keep those for Richardson, keep that for a young Josh Primo, and potentially whomever you're drafting at, in the top 10.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to hold anything against a player. Social media, everyone gets petty on social media, but let's face it, like it doesn't matter that much in the long run that that Lonnie Walker, right after the game, went on social media, was liking things about, Pop's crazy, should have played him longer, why didn't Pop play you more than 9 minutes this, 10 minutes that, oh, he should have been in the second half when he was providing you offense, what is this, I understand liking that stuff, you're frustrated as a player, and it's not that it's about one specific instance of anything, but for me, it's a guy who's clearly frustrated with his situation, and I think rightfully so to a degree, right? Like he's a guy who's never really had a consistent role. When he finally kind of started getting that role, we saw him build some momentum, but even once he kind of settled into that role as the sixth man, granted the back injury happened, but we saw it go right back down the other way, right? Super inconsistent, even though we got 20 points in a 3-game stretch. It was 38% from the field, 34% from the field, 56% from the field, and then he had 7-4, and then he didn't score at all in that game that he got hurt. So, again, I'm not going to hold it against him for getting injured or anything like that. That's not on him. But the consistency is still a problem, and I think a guy like Josh Richardson honestly just provides you more as a defender. He's more consistent, he's stronger, he's got a better defensive IQ, he's got a little bit more versatility. So, if it's me and I'm the front office, I'm keeping Josh Richardson over Lonnie Walker. Nothing against Lonnie. I think he could be fantastic for another team, but like you mentioned, man, like they've got to figure out, do they want minutes for Primo? What direction are they going in? And does Lonnie fit that? And that's going to be up to the front office. But again, for me, I'm going Josh Richardson, and I hate to say that because I really love Lonnie, and I was very high on him for a very long time. But, it's going to be year 5, right? And you can't hold on forever.
Good grief, year 5, bro. I remember, oh my goodness, Noah. That's crazy. I remember the Spurs-Raptors game 2019, right? Whenever he came in, hit that 3, the whole crowd was going nuts. I was at that game. It's crazy, man. That was his rookie year. Last thing on the Richardson-Lonnie thing before we head on to Zach Collins. Richardson, underrated part. Well, not really underrated because we all know it, but that veteran presence is obviously felt within the locker room. I think you can kind of tell that, especially on that video where it's he and Primo talking, and he's talking about how Primo's talking about how, you got us talking spicy and blah, blah. Growing up where I grew up, we love to talk spicy. You could call it that. So I know exactly what Primo means, and I think that presence in the locker room is exactly what you need. That's exactly what I tweeted the Spurs account. That's the perfect guy that you need for this young group. Moving on, Zach Collins. I'm going to let you take this one. Kind of a couple words, couple sentences on kind of how you feel and what they should do with him heading into this offseason.
It's a complicated situation, but I also think it's very simple. Like, how much can we read into the end of the year where he's playing really well against bad teams? It's the same sort of circumstance that we talked about for the team in general. Okay, you're beating up on bad teams, tanking teams, Blazers, Rockets, Thunder, even the Pelicans, who are, 10 games under 500. That's not tanking, but they're not world beaters by any degree. So how much can you read into it? In that same breath, this is a guy who did not play basketball. We've talked about it many times, many times, for more than a year and a half. And the fact that he's come back, he's looked better. He's knocking down mid-range shots, historically been really bad at that. Finishing better at the rim, historically been really bad at that. Knocking down a few threes. We saw hints of that before. I want to see what else you can get out of him. $7 million isn't that much. The contract is 50% guaranteed. You keep him around. That doesn't necessarily mean he has to be the backup center. You can look in the draft. You can look through free agency. But give him another shot. Respectfully, there was a reason why you brought him in on such a lucrative deal for the team. One that, if they decide to keep him for a third season, it's completely unguaranteed if they cut him before that third season starts. There's a lot of incentive for them to sign this deal. So why not just see it out for the second year? So that's my opinion on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that. I think for me, my mentality, if I was Zach Collins, I'd be playing a lot of Nipsey Hussle, the song called Stuck in the Grind, and that's what I'd be doing because all year, Noah, you and I have talked about he needs reps. He just needs to get back up to NBA speed and really just embrace the game again because he hasn't had that chance, right? He's been hurt, and overall throughout his career, he hasn't really been able to find that rhythm. So as far as what the Spurs should do, I think as a backup five, there's some potential there. That's always been the role you and I have always envisioned for him. You mentioned as well, that doesn't mean you're married to him and you don't draft a big man. For God's sakes, you have 3 first-round picks as we stand here today. So you better take a 5. You know what I mean? You better do that. But as far as Zach Collins, for me, what I took away from him is I do like the flash. I do like the fact that he did, improve with the reps that he got, albeit against poor competition. With that said, for a player that hasn't played consistent hoops in such a long time, I don't think personally, for me at least, I can't sit here and say, oh, he's not going to be this or he's not going to be that just yet. Because for one, my expectation is backup 5, and if he fails to meet that expectation, there's probably a lot of other things going on in terms of his health, in terms of kind of the fit here. I think overall it's kind of a really interesting scenario, and I think going into this next offseason, it really is make or break, because you mentioned, the contract isn't guaranteed after this year. It's really he's playing for all intents and purposes. It could be for his career, right? There is, after this, there may not be another opportunity like this to play significant minutes on an NBA team, right? Because next year, if the Spurs are bad, again, what's going to happen, right? Someone has to play. So that's kind of my take on this whole Zach Collins thing. And I'd like to push it again to you for your guy, Jock Landale. That was someone you were really, really kind of, not with the pom-poms and everything, but you were excited to see Jock Landale. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was excited to see what he could do offensively because the Spurs, love Drew Eubanks again. He went on the other podcast I'm on, but he talked big about, I'm going to be a three-point shooter. I've been working on it. Chip England actually told me, I'm one of the best three-point shooters on the team. I got to let it fly. Well, my guy, you let 2 3-pointers fly in your time in San Antonio in year 2, and you didn't make one of them. You were here for more than half the season. You had your opportunity to shoot the 3. You said you had the green light from Pop. That didn't seem to be the case. So, if that's not going to happen from you, and you're not really a great defender, by all means, Zach Collins isn't healthy yet. Let's get Jock on the field. And we saw him in Austin Spurs once he came back from the concussion protocol, from COVID protocol, and he looked good in Austin. And I wrote pieces about him. I broke down the games. He can step into a mid-range jumper if somebody's closing out hard on him. He's a really good catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. He's a guy who can really bang down low. He's got some post moves. He's not the best athlete. He doesn't have great feet. He's a defensive liability, but he's interesting as depth insurance. Maybe he's a situational big if you need some floor spacing. And I don't really, between the injuries and the way the rotations work this year, I'm not 100% sure he got a fair shake. But fair shake or not, I still think for the most part, we understand who Jock Landale is. And that's a guy who, minimum contract guy, keep him around another year as depth insurance, see what happens. Otherwise, he probably should not be your number one option as the backup center. I love him. I think he's a good passer. I think he's a good shooter. He's versatile in some ways, but defensively, I hate to say it, but a little bit of a train wreck. So I'm okay with him not getting big minutes, but at least keep him around. Like, he seemed like he was good for the morale of the team. He didn't seem to complain about any of the opportunities. He seemed happy to be alive, and sometimes you need those guys who are like puppies, right? Like, they're just happy to be alive on the planet existing. So it's fine to have those guys around, but maybe don't have them as your number one option for backup center.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for me going forward, I love what you said about he's a minimum guy. I mean, not every player you have on your roster is going to be making $20 million a year. So I think he's a perfect kind of fit in that role. As you know, your 13th, 14th man, probably your third big right off the bench. In a pinch, if you need him, depending on the matchup, you can play him out there as well. But I kind of didn't really expect much, just like you. We were encouraged because it was kind of a new skill set, right? As that catch and shoot, 3-point shooter at the 5. The Spurs, obviously, I mean, unless Jakob Poeltl's going to go back to Utah and flash those little draft combine workouts, I don't think they're getting that. So I like that from Landale. I'm glad he offers that. And I'm fine with with keeping him around, heading into next year, because that's still a skill set, like I mentioned, that you don't have. In a pinch, you can definitely use him depending on the matchup, depending on who's hurt. So I'm actually thinking that's I really like what you said. I really echo all of that. There's a player I want to move on to next that's not on this list, because one of our first podcast episodes, it was after the game against the Lakers, I believe, where Bates-Diop ended up closing the game.
Interesting. And, I had him on the rundown, and then I erased him because I was like, afterthought. Yeah. But yeah, let's do it.
Nah. Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, so Bates-Diop, for me personally, I think he's another one of those guys like Landale as a minimum piece, kind of at like the 4, because the Spurs don't really have many of those kind of lengthier, longer kind of 6'7", 6'8" guys. So I think from an archetype perspective, you need a guy like that. But at the end of the day, Noah, respectfully, for a team that has 3 first-round picks, I wouldn't be if I'm, just objectively speaking here. You need players that fit that archetype, but you need upgrades as well, and you need guys that can play right now, right? You need guys that are able to play 18, 20, 22, 24 minutes as a rookie, right? Especially for this team in the modern NBA, because they have nothing at the 3 and the 4 in that category, right? So if you need a guy like that on a minimum deal, kind of like Landale, then I understand it. But quite frankly, I don't think he offers anything that a rookie wouldn't offer for you off the bat. And I mean that in the most respectful manner. And I would love to kick it to you now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, clearly the Spurs understand that rebounding is huge. First off, rebounding is not the end-all, be-all of every NBA game. It's not all going to be decided by rebounding. You could get out-rebounded by 10 or 15 and still win a game. It's very much possible. But with these Spurs, one of the biggest issues is they get out-rebounded, but on the offensive glass. They allow their opponents to get on the offensive glass. They allow a ton of second chance points. They allow a ton of three-pointers. Their defensive versatility at the 3, 4, and 5 just isn't up to snuff. And so, theoretically, you look at a guy like Keita Bates-Diop, okay, well, that's sort of what you want. I don't know if when you were a kid, you ever told your parents, oh, man, I really want XYZ toy. I really, really want that. And maybe they saw that and went, oh, man, I don't like that price tag, but I can get one that's, similar. And so when I look at KBD, I look at the Spurs going, oh, well, we need a switchable 3-4. We need a guy who can kind of shoot the 3 ball. We need a guy who can really thrive in transition. But, we don't really have the budget for that right now. And we don't really have the means to acquire that. So, we're going with the great value brand. No, there's nothing wrong with the great value brand. It gets the job done. I love it. I bought the great value brand all through college. But that's not always going to get the job done. And for KBD, fine on a minimum contract, but if that's the guy you want in the game 25, 30 minutes, even 20 minutes, 15 minutes, probably not going to get the job done. Well, we know he's not a great 3-point shooter. He's not a self-creator. He's got some defensive switchability. He's got the length, but he's not the best athlete. He's not the most fluid athlete. There's not a lot of upside there. So love him as far as like a minimum contract guy goes, just like Jock. But, KBD, fine, bring him back if you want. But like I said at the preseason podcast, I'm fine if you let him walk. Like either way, I'm not gonna lose sleep if you let a guy like KBD walk. Though I agree with you, archetype makes sense for the Spurs. That's what they should be aiming for, but better, obviously.
Yeah, and I love your point about the parents and the budget thing because. So for me, no, interesting. Before we get on to our last guy, I remember like 2008, 2009, GameStop had the PlayStation 2. It was a silver edition, Madden 08 edition for $100. The PS3 was already out. But my mom at that time, I believe, was she was still a single mother, 3 kids, living in Austin. So I know I'm not getting the PS3, Noah. I know I'm not. I know. So I said, hey, for $100, you can just give me this for Christmas. And lo and behold, that's what I ended up getting. And man, I played that Joker till it broke, man. So yes, that hit a little close to home for me, brother. But the last guy we got here is Doug McDermott. I'm going to kick it to you to start with Doug because you have a lot of interesting thoughts on him, for you. And I think for me, man, I'm kind of in that same boat. So I'll kick it off to you.
Yeah, man. I love Dougie McBuckets. I still think he might be the best 3-point shooter on this team. The shot versatility off screens, off pin downs, off movement, catch and shoot. I'm sure even a little bit off the dribble if you gave him the chance, maybe 1 or 2 per game. I don't know. But the thing is, defensively, such a dumpster fire on the defensive end. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, and I would gladly pull them up if you stalled for me, but I can give you the gist of the numbers here. Of the players who defended at least 400 shots this year, he was the 3rd worst in the NBA. Almost 54% defensive field goal percentage. Guys were scoring on him like he was a turnstile, right? It was the Ole defense it was bad. It was really bad. He doesn't offer a lot of versatility. He is the son of a coach. He understands how basketball works, but he has a lot of athletic, deficiencies. He's aging. He's getting older. He's not that long. And for me, if he's not knocking down shots, then he's not really providing a lot of value. And sure, maybe take him off the bench, but come on, man. $13.5, $14 million to come off the bench. I just don't see it. And it's not working. 3-4 with Keldon. I don't care what combination. Doug at the 4, Doug at the 3, Keldon at the 3, Keldon at the 4. That combination of 2 players as your starters that we saw for most of the year, that's not working. So you got to figure something out. And for me, you're not moving on from Keldon. You're not saying bye, Keldon, to figure out how to make Doug McDermott work. Love Dougie McBuckets, but man, I think it's time to move on. I don't know how you do it, through a trade, it's got to be through a trade. He's under contract for another 2 years, but yeah. I just don't know what the market is like. I don't know what you can get for him, but at this point, I'm fine with them trying to move on and be aggressive and stack younger, more versatile assets that make more sense for this roster. Will it hurt their 3-point shooting? Sure. But we've seen other teams, for example, the Bucks, the Bulls, they've been, hyper competitive all year. They're some of the lowest 3-point volume teams. It's about the percentage. And you know what? He's one of the best 3-point shooters in terms of percentage, in terms of volume on this team, but I think you can make it up by committee elsewhere, depending on who you add. And he might be one of those additions by subtraction.
Yeah, I like your thoughts on that, and I agree. For me as well, I think with Doug, heading into this year that I really kind of was expecting to see, and it's a number you brought up one of our podcast episodes, that overall his off-ball just ability, outside of just shooting, just on cuts to the basket, everything like that would be something that the Spurs would actually use, right? And you had the number, I believe that his cuts are down significantly, because cuts to the basket, he doesn't even attempt 1 cut per game, if my memory is correct, right? It's something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's cut by, he only had like 2.5 a year ago, which was still pretty high volume, all things considered. And this year it was a little under 1.
And that was one thing I was kind of like, okay, that's interesting, right? And then I understand the shot versatility is there off the ball, which is awesome. But I agree with you as well. If you're going to run Keldon in the starting lineup, you're already a team that's, lacking significantly in shot creation. You essentially have Dejounte Murray in your starting lineup. That's the only guy that can create offense. And you have 4 guys that respectfully can do it at a consistent basis whatsoever. So he limits you there. Defensively, he's a very big liability. And so for me, I kind of agree with you that it may be time to move him. I would like to see the bench thing work out, but like you mentioned, $13.5 million, $14 million for a player that, honestly, if we've seen Lonnie Walker be, replaced with a guy like Josh Richardson, a guy like Josh Primo off the ball for me offers some of that versatility that McDermott's kind of showed, throughout his career. I think Primo can kind of give that for you kind of right off the bat. And I may be, that may be a little bit too much to expect from a guy like that. But I think off the ball, especially at Alabama, like, one of our first podcasts, we talked about that. I think Primo could, kind of fulfill a role like that. And not only that, too, I mentioned it again. You have 3 first-round picks and likely a high second-round or a very high second-round pick, right? It's like 35, 36. Surely you can find a 6'7", 3, whether it's a backup 3, a spot starting 3, that can give you at least something in a pinch similar to Doug McDermott and much more on the defensive end. So I would look to move him. I think for a good team, potentially he'd actually kind of fetch you something relatively well, right? Maybe a player that needs a new home and maybe a late first or something like that, a lottery protected first, something kind of like that. But for me, Noah, I think moving on from Doug McDermott wouldn't be a surprise for me. And I honestly think if it's available, the Spurs should go that route.
Yeah, no, and I think that's totally fair. I think that's totally fine. Now, like, if they figure out a way to make him work next season, 100%. And you said, okay, well, maybe they can find a guy who's like a similar archetype. Man, they drafted him at 41. Now, I'm not the highest on Joe Wieskamp. We've talked about him a little bit. We've joked here and there about his, 42-inch vertical. Like, he's not that guy. Like, athletically, it's not that functional. The lateral mobility isn't great. The feet are a little bit heavy. Defensively, the only player on the roster with a worse defensive field goal percentage than Doug was Joe. The only reason it didn't count was because he didn't have enough defensive field goal attempts to qualify for the leaderboard, but he let his opponents shoot almost 63% from the field, so it's not like it's like he was taking lessons from Doug on more than one area, right? Like, he was learning the ins and outs of the trade as a shooter. We heard that. Tom Orsborn, Jeff McDonald, Mike Finger from the San Antonio Express News all year we're talking about how Doug McDermott, he's taken Joe Wieskamp under his wing. He's teaching him the ins and out of off-ball shooting, how to speed up that release. He's working with Chip England, but man, keep him away from him defensively. Like, it's not working. It's not going to work. But I mean, for Joe, all jokes aside, maybe he can be a little bit more serviceable defensively. Maybe they can unlock some things. He is just a rookie. He didn't get a ton of playing time. Maybe that sample size was too small to read into the really bad defensive numbers. At the same time, 3-point percentage wasn't great. The shot's still looking a little bit slow for the NBA level. We'll see how that works in year 2. But as far as the players we mentioned, I think those are all the guys that we really need to talk about. We'll go more in depth during the offseason. We're going to talk about the draft more in the offseason and stuff. But let's go ahead and, for our last segment here, revisit some of our boldest preseason predictions. We hit the nail right on the head with, I think, a couple of these guesses, and we definitely whiffed on some freezing cold takes here and there, man. Like, some of these were really bad, and that's all right, because I think you can puff your chest out a bit about those takes that you were right about, right? You can say, yo, I was right about that, like, bang the drum on that, be proud of that. At the same time, you can get exposed for bad takes and be fine with that, because nobody's batting 100, right? Like, no one's perfect. So why don't we play a game real quick of rock, paper, scissors? We'll see who gets to go first in talking about some of the takes we were right about and wrong about. So, ready? We're going to do rock, paper, scissors, shoot. You ready for that?
Okay,
Alrighty.
Let's go.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
I got scissors.
All right,
scissors.
scissors. Okay, well, scissors. All right, one more time.
Okay.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. All right, scissors twice.
All
right. No more scissors. Okay, one more. Third time's the charm. Here we go. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. All right. Okay. You scissors three times. All right. Okay.
I tried to switch it up on him. I thought I was gonna get him with the paper. Okay. So I think for me, I'll go with 2 first off the bat. So the one I was right about heading into the season, it's not on the rundown, but it's something that I was right about, was I thought the Spurs were going to rank bottom 3 in isolation frequency coming into this year. The shot creation thing, guys, like, I know y'all are probably sick and tired of me saying this, but I know isolation numbers don't tell the whole story when it comes to that. But I think just in terms of just on-ball creation, I think isolation numbers for particular players more so than the team, but for individual players, you would be able to, you can kind of feel it out a little bit and you'll be able to tell. And so when I looked at the Spurs, I was like, I know they're not going to run very many isolation plays, just kind of based on where they are, kind of heading into this season. And so last year as a team they were at 5.2%. This team they're at they're at 5.2%, which ranked still in the kind of bottom half of the league, but it was like in the mid 20s. This year they were dead last in the NBA in isolation frequency. So that's one thing I was right about. I just was not expecting them to do. I mean, even with an ISO heavy guy like DeMar DeRozan, I was like, yeah, there's no way they're gonna actually, pound the rock like that. No pun intended. And as far as things I was wrong about, it has to be their defensive rating, man. I thought the Spurs were gonna be a top 10 defense for the bulk of this year, and I didn't think they were gonna go to the playoffs. But me and you both said, and I've said it on numerous, even your Twitter Spaces and other articles, that they're going to have to adopt the Knicks philosophy from the previous season of
Absolutely.
high level defense and just adequate, efficient offense, right? That's what that was going to be it. And I know that sounds super simple. Obviously, it's much deeper than that. But I think that was going to be your favorite term is bread and butter. That was going to be their tortilla and butter, like nobody's business, bro. And it just didn't happen, Noah. As a team defense for them, they struggled. I mean, they do everything to funnel towards Jakob Poeltl, and I get that. I respect that. But they just get next to nothing. As a unit, I mean, they just look like a team that just struggles defensively to play as one. And I just think that was probably my biggest whiff, was just their overall defensive ability this year.
Yeah, and I think, hey, like we're all wrong. I'm going to go ahead and start off with something I was wrong about. So coming out of the preseason, I wasn't quite on the Josh Primo train that this guy's going to be, surprise rookie. He's going to surprise everybody. I know some people were even calling him like a mini Kobe, and that was too far. But for me, I was still pretty high, or at least riding the high from his preseason performances. He was shooting really well from three. He looked fluid. He looked confident. And so my number one prediction was, no doubt in my mind, I said this on the podcast verbatim when I was doing it by myself, the preseason prediction. I said, I'm confident that Josh Primo will blow the rookie record for three-pointers made in a single game out of the water. He's going to tie that. Easy tie. It's just 6. He's going to do that at least once during the season. Dame, he shot 30.7% from 3 this season as a rookie. The most he made was 3. He did that 4 times. Didn't even come close. Didn't even come close. I was very wrong about that. Wasn't even close to being right about that. Now, one thing I am really proud about, though, on the other end of the spectrum, is I said, I think the Spurs are going to finish 34-48, and they're going to earn their first top 10 pick since Tim Duncan. Dame, they finished exactly 34-48. I don't know how I did it. I predicted it right. Not a game lower, not a game more. Exactly 34-48, and they have the 9th best lottery odds in the 2022 NBA draft. So at this point, the only way I could be wrong about the second part about them getting a top 10 pick is if somehow the team 10 and 11 hopped in front of them in the lottery and pushed them to the 11th pick. That's not going to happen. So I'm confident. Again, I know I said I'm confident before, but I'm confident that the second part of this is going to come true. Dame, I'll throw it back to you. What are a few more that you were either proud or maybe not so proud about? And you don't have to stick with negative. We can go positive here, but really whatever you want to share, just so we can reflect on some of these predictions we made, because I mean, they're all over the place. I mean, as you might expect it to be sometimes.
Oh, yeah. For me, so your record was perfect. So mine was actually 33-49, and I remember getting a lot of slander on that tweet. And one thing I'll never do again, I'll never delete tweets like that again. I should have just kept it up, but I don't know. Sometimes, guys, I have bad anxiety. I just be acting dumb sometimes. I should have never deleted it. And so I think for me, seeing you hit that on that nail on the head is beautiful. Credit to you, bro. Because I was like, I wonder what Noah said. I didn't remember, but yeah, that's so interesting. That's good. For me, I think the pace is the interesting point. I don't remember having an exact opinion on where they would rank in pace, but I figured they were going to be a heavy transition team. Or just in general, I think they were just going to be pushing the ball up the floor a ton. And they actually finished 6th in pace. So I would say that I wasn't necessarily right or wrong about that, but it definitely surprised me. Now, in terms of their offense, that's one thing for me, Noah. I thought they were going to be a bottom 5 offense in the NBA. I believe in terms of offensive rating, I believe they rank in the top half of the league, or they're 16th or 17th or something like that.
They're 16th.
Yeah. So if you would have told me that heading into this year, I'm not going to lie to you, with my thoughts of them being a top 10 defense in terms of defensive rating and the 16th best offense, no, I probably would have said they were going to be very close or actually make the playoffs, because that would have been much better than what I would have thought.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that's one thing I was wrong about. The pace thing really surprised me, though. And one last thing, I was wrong. I never, regardless of how you feel, I never envisioned Dejounte Murray making the All-Star team this year. Just flat out. Didn't see it coming. I didn't see 20, regardless how you feel about the numbers as well. I mean, you know how we feel. Dejounte making the All-Star team was something I didn't expect. If you would have told me he would have been an All-Star, I would have been like, okay, like, you're crazy. Take the silver and black glasses off, right? But no, he was an All-Star this year. That's something that I definitely got to take on the chin, because maybe, like I said in my last Pounding the Rock preview piece, maybe I just underestimated, some of the pieces on this team, right? Maybe that could be happening with Keldon Johnson right now as well, right? And in my personal opinion. So I think DeJounte's excellent season was something I didn't see coming, and something that I would definitely say I was wrong about.
And I think for me on the podcast, and these are all like, if you want to hear my takes that I made to double check if I'm telling the truth, you can go back and listen to the preseason podcast. I think it's episode 15 or 16. You can check it out. But I said, I think DeJounte will start making headway towards becoming an all-star. Like you, I did not have him making the all-star team. When I say making headway, I meant like, okay, people will start talking about him like, this is a guy who you may want to watch out for. He may make an all-star team in like the next 2-3 years. He made it this year. There's literally no way around that. And I'm fine to be wrong about that too. Because as we've talked about on other episodes of this podcast, you've heard it in spaces, you've probably seen it in my writing. One of the things that I'm okay with being wrong about is how good a player is or may become. If they exceed those expectations, that is fantastic. Not just for the fan base, but it's phenomenal for me. As a writer, somebody who covers this team, who breaks down video, who records podcasts, like seeing a player become an all-star level player, that makes my job more fun. It's just simply more fun to watch a really good player. Now, do I still have doubts about DeJounte? Sure. I don't think he's like an MVP guy. I don't think he's like necessarily all NBA, but he is an all-star. You can't take that away from him. Injury replacement all-star, say whatever you want. Still an all-star. There's injury replacements every year.
Exactly.
Every single year. You cannot take that away from him. The other thing that I thought was interesting is I said, okay, he's going to lead the team in scoring. He's going to be at or near 20 points per game. I got that one right again. I actually wasn't expecting him to pass up 20. I was thinking more like 18, 19, 20 high end. So the fact he got to 21.1, I think that's pretty impressive. The aggression in the second half of the season, hopefully he can build upon that. I think the last thing that I will say I definitely got wrong was about the defense, just like you. I really did think that this was going to be a top 10 defense. They had a guy like Devin Vassell, who seemed like a really solid defender off ball. You got guys like Derek White and Dejounte Murray, who ostensibly look like they could be one of the best defensive backcourts in the NBA. Didn't work out that way. You had Jakob Poeltl. You had Keldon Johnson, who looked like he would be at the very least average on the defensive end. And then on the backups, you got KBD. You've got a guy like Trey Jones, who was ACC Defensive Player of the Year whenever he was in college. So I just thought that it had the recipe for being a really good defense. Didn't work out that way. The way that they fought over screens was less than encouraging. They funneled everything to Jakob Poeltl. They also allowed the worst field goal percentage in the league at mid-range, which, like, you want to force teams into shooting in the mid-range. And for some reason, whether it's luck, whether it's, maybe they really just didn't have great coverage, that's not how it worked out for them. Worst defensive field goal percentage in the league from mid-range. So I really should, I feel like this is something I probably should have seen with guys like Doug, Keldon, a lot of question marks behind Jakob Poeltl, even question marks in terms of Trey Jones, Bryn Forbes. I mean, like, there was always going to be question marks. So I'm not sure, other than me just really being in like the Spurs fantasy land for a little bit, why I thought that they were going to be elite. But it's something I'm willing to be wrong about because, look, man, as we mentioned, you can't bat 100. Like, you're not going to be perfect on all these takes. But I think it's interesting to look back at these because I'm going to do the same thing next year. I'm going to give you my predictions. Hopefully I bat closer to 100, but it's interesting to see how progressions or even disappointments can really leave your predictions looking insane, like by the end of the year, man.
Yeah, no, man. I think for me, and I've learned a lot, from this season overall, just kind of looking at things, and it's really forced me to kind of really grind the tape a little bit more than, I'm used to, which I enjoy, man. I really, really do. And especially, like I mentioned in the intro to the show, like joining a place like Pounding the Rock, like joining SB Nation stuff, like, man, you just got to be next level, bro. Like, you just got to keep going and keep going. And I think watching a team like the Spurs this year really makes you, whether you're a fan or a writer, whatever, it really kind of tests what you think you know about the game. You know what I mean? Because I think for me, I really thought, man, the Spurs are going to be that top 10 defense. Like I would have put money on that. No, like I'm not a betting man, but I would have put money. So that's just kind of where I'm at with it, man. But before we kind of close it out, bro, it's been a blast. This season was super dope. Really, really glad to have worked with you throughout all this year. I hope it continues, and I hope we continue to just kill it on the pod, because I'm not going to lie, I feel like this is one of my best episodes I've ever done. I feel like really, really solid about this one, but it's a credit to you, bro. So I appreciate you for always motivating me, always keeping me on track with this, bro. And let's kill it this offseason, bro. I'm excited.
Of course, man. And really, like, I do appreciate everything you do for me here. I know we've talked about it before. We've let the fans know like what you do for this show, but it's also about holding me accountable, about helping making me better, not just as like a podcast producer or like a script writer, but like as an editor, as a writer, just like everything that you do. I see all the work that you put into it, and I wake up and on like the days that I'm tired, I'm like, dang, I don't really feel like doing much today. I see like, man, Dame is not just writing for our site. He's not just on the podcast with me. He's not just writing for multiple outlets. You know, he doesn't just have his own podcast. He's going to school. He's got a job. Like, I have no right to be tired. So I appreciate you for pushing me, making me better. But again, man, I think this does it for today. So one more time, thank you so much for joining me on the pod. And go ahead and plug anything you want. Let Spurs fans know where they can follow you on social media, where they can find your wonderful basketball, football, any other sports that you want to shout out, anything, any of your content, because it's great. You're a great dude. Appreciate everything you do, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, yes, sir, brother. The feeling's mutual. Y'all can go ahead and follow me on Twitter, though, at DA Bartonek. That's at DABARTONEK. Almost forgot my last name there. Go ahead and watch all my football, my Washington Commanders content on Rigo's Rag. Has been doing some excellent numbers in terms of just viewers and comments and everything like that. I greatly appreciate it. I do stuff for the Spurs about the Spurs on Pounding the Rock. Obviously, the podcast here. I have the Dame's Dropback podcast. I cover Texas State stuff for Bobcat Insider. Just a lot of stuff, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts, and hopefully I have some cool news to share with everyone on the next episode, right? So thank you again, Noah, for having me, bro. This was super dope. And I'm all the way out here in Oklahoma. I'm in Thunder territory right now, but I'm still pounding the rock, you dig? So I appreciate it, bro. This was dope.
And so y'all know, even though the good guys are headed to an early vacation, Dame and I are still going to be we're going to be recording regularly. Like San Antonio, they have a busy offseason. There's going to be a lot of content. We're going to be doing some draft content. We want to bring draft experts, special guests that are plugged into collegiate, international basketball, because I think this is the most exciting part of the year, right? Like, we love the season. We love learning from the season, but the offseason, that's where you generate hope, where you generate excitement. Whoever you pick in the draft, that person could end up being instrumental to getting you back to the promised land, so to speak. So really excited to get started on all the draft content. We'll be starting that up soon. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in for this edition of Alamo City Limits. And for those of you listening at home, make sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We've got an amazing staff of writers over at Pounding the Rock, including myself, Dame, Bruno, JR, Marilyn, Zach, Jesus. Like, we've got a dream team over there. So really do us a favor, go check out our stuff. And until next time, Spurs fans, take care.